Hi everyone, welcome to Secret Sauce. Over the past decade, Kubernetes has changed the way we deploy, scale, and monitor software. And now we're learning that there are specific security challenges related to the container-based architecture. With us this morning, Ran Ilany. Good morning, Ran.
Good morning.
Ran, you are the co-founder and CEO of Portshift, providing identity-based workload protection.
That is correct.
What exactly is that?
So essentially, when we first started the company or founded the company, we understood that the traditional network security solution simply won't work.
What do you mean? Why shouldn't they work?
Because of the dynamic nature of containers and Kubernetes. Containers and Kubernetes are essentially, the containers are rebooting constantly. We have auto-scaling, auto-configuration of those workloads. IPs are never constant. So essentially, we understood that you need a different way to identify a workload at runtime. Mm-hmm. And from this reason, we have decided to change the way that we are identifying the workload at runtime, and moreover, to be able to generate the identity of the workload from the pipeline itself, from the CI/CD.
Mm-hmm. Before we go into that,
Absolutely.
Why is it so important to identify the workload at runtime? What are the risks of sticking to traditional security methods?
So I think many years ago we all know about multi-factor authentication solution. Every user has a way to identify itself before accessing its or his resources. We have text that we get in the mobile phone. We are getting alert that we are changing a machine from a machine to machine, obviously. So the question is, how come in 2020 we don't have an identity solution that will essentially secure accessing between the workload, between the container, to the same resources that are very much important for us to protect. And with this notion, we essentially gone and invented the notion of identity for workloads themselves.
So basically, you're taking the multi-factor authentication that we know from our mobile devices, and you're taking that principle and applying it to workloads.
That is correct. That is correct. And the risk is obviously because those environments are very, very much dynamic. Containers, again, are very much dynamic, moving in the runtime environment. We want to sort of block the, I would say, option that a crypto miner can get into a runtime environment without any I would say way of protection. It can be by mistake. A developer downloads a specific open source from a specific location in the website and just do an SSH or accessing the runtime environment. And here you go, you have a new piece of code which is introduced in the runtime, and you don't really have any type of control on the actual runtime. So the notion of creating an identity for the workload itself needs to be born in the pipeline itself and the CI/CD.
Mm-hmm. So who introduces the actual identity? I mean, does the developer need to decorate his own code, or where does the identity happen?
Yeah, so the whole notion or the whole design of the solution should be facilitated in such a way that it won't be intrusive. Specifically, since we're dealing with DevOps and operation folks, that they want everything to be up and running and no hassle with configuration. So the whole solution, first of all, need to be SaaS enabled and to begin with. And the second thing, not to be sort of very tied into the actual process or the actual coding of within the pipeline itself. So the way that the solution hooks into the pipeline is simply by installing a one-time plugin on the pipeline itself, and that's it. From this moment on, you can actually be able to identify what came from your pipeline itself and essentially everything else that got into your runtime and didn't come from your pipeline, obviously, and protect the network itself.
Are there specific infrastructure-specific vendors that you support, or are you vendor agnostic?
So our ecosystem, to some extent, is driven by the pipeline. So any CI/CD vendor will be potentially a partner of ours. So JFrog, for instance, is a very good example. They are actually providing an artifact database, which we can hook in and obviously to create the identity of the workload before protecting the runtime. Another example would be a Red Hat OpenShift, with their own solution for enterprises with Kubernetes, again hooking to their own infrastructure in order to protect the runtime.
Mm-hmm. So what does it take to actually apply this solution?
So it's opening an account in the SaaS management server that we have, and installing a plugin on top of the pipeline on the CI/CD that you have in a Kubernetes cluster, and from this moment on, you have the protection on your runtime, which is part of the solution.
I understand. Do you Well, we've seen a growing interest in this category. You're a fairly new player, right? You've existed for about 2 years.
1.5 years. We are fairly new startup. Yes,
But this is a red hot field, and we've seen activity here. We've seen maybe a competitor of yours, Pareto, being purchased by Palo Alto. Where do you see this going? How do you see the future of security and protection in a container-based architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a good question, and thank you for this. I think the fact that Pareto was bought by Palo Alto Network is just another confirmation of the fact that, the folks really understand that we need to protect the workload in a different way. We need an identity for the workload, obviously, to protect our own runtime infrastructure, and when we are talking about the network security. And speaking of which, when talking about network security, I think we see two major trends. We have seen two major trends, starting with the containers 4 to 5 years ago. And now we are hearing about Kubernetes, which is an orchestration system for the containers, again, to make everything much more faster and orchestrate the container at runtime. And last but not least, we are hearing a lot about the service mesh. Service mesh is actually the network infrastructure that binds or really connect between workload at runtime. What Portshift does essentially is generating this type of identity from the pipeline itself towards the runtime and leverages the service mesh, obviously. The service mesh itself will be something that we will hear much more about in the next few years also.
Hashtag service mesh.
Yes, that is correct. Something like this.
Okay, Ran, thank you very much. That's been very insightful.
Absolutely. Thank you, and was glad to be here.
Thank you.